Over the years, it has happened pretty regularly. In fact, it happened just a couple of weeks ago. Someone will come forward. As you know, we have prayer available here after service, and people come forward from prayer. But every once in a while, there'll be someone that walks forward, and I can tell by the look on their face, they are not happy with me. And I know what they're going to say most times. I know what they're going to say. They're either a visitor or they've just recently begun attending, because if they've been coming for a while, they've already experienced this, and so they know what's going on. But sometimes they'll have somebody that will walk up, and they have this look on their face, and it's a troubled look, and I can tell they're coming at me, and they'll come up, and typically they'll say something like, "Who called you?" And what do you mean? Did my wife call you? Did my friend call you? And I'll look at them and I'll go, "Who are you?" Right? I don't know you. They think the message that day was preached just for them. And of course, it wasn't. But God brought them that day because there was something they needed to hear. He loves them so much that He moved me in my study earlier in the week to prepare a message that was for them. I didn't know that. I've played with people sometimes. Somebody will come up and they'll go, like, "Who called you? Did my wife call you?" Go, "Oh, yeah, dude called me and told me your whole story. So I preached this message just for you, not for anybody else in the room. It was just for you." And then they realize, like, "Oh, okay." Now, let's be honest. Most Sundays we come here, as you know, we come, and the message is for everybody. It's God's truth. We just, that's what we do. We study through the Bible verse by verse, and it's a message that oftentimes we would come and we'd say, that wasn't for me right now. There was nothing specific in my life right now that applied to, but I know it's true, and the day's going to come when I'll probably need to draw on that. So thank you, Lord, for your word. But isn't it true there are some times where you're going through something and you come on a Sunday morning and it's like the message is just for you? Okay, so what we're going to look at today in John 17, I believe, is that kind of message, but not for one person. I believe it's for all of us. I believe that this message is for us right now, right here, where we live at this moment. And I think it has special poignant, special power. There's a wonderful story in the book of Esther where Esther is the queen of Persia, and she's not allowed, even though she's the queen, she's not allowed to come into the king's presence any old time she wants. And it's been a while since he's called for her. Her uncle Mordecai comes to her and says, "Esther, you need to know that a law has been passed that's going to allow people to kill all the Jews, all your people." "What do you want me to do about it?" she says. And she goes, "Go to the king, talk to him." And she says, "He hasn't called me. If I just go in there without being invited, he'll kill me." Mordecai says this, and you know the words. "Who knows but that you've been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this?" I believe those words apply to you today, here, right now. That what we're going to look at today is God's message to you and to me. Amen. It's the last night. Jesus and the boys have finished their meal. He's given them final instructions. They're about to leave that room and go back to the village of Bethany where they spend the night, the home of Lazarus and his two sisters. Each night, as they would leave Jerusalem and go back to Bethany for the night, Jesus would stop at a little place there down in the valley called Gethsemane, where he would spend some time in prayer, kind of end the day in prayer. And they would make the 1.5-mile trip to Bethany, where they would spend the night, next day get up, come back to Jerusalem. But this is the last night. They're about ready to leave that room where they've had the Passover meal. They're going to stop at Gethsemane and then back to Bethany. But before they leave, Jesus prays. He prays for himself, he prays for the boys, and he prays for everybody who will come to faith in him because of them. So what we're reading about here is Jesus' prayer for you. Amen. Look at verse 13. "But now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves." Of course, joy was not what the disciples were experiencing right then. They were They were upset. They were bummed out. They were discouraged because Jesus had made it very clear that he was leaving them. And as their rabbi, he was everything to them. And it was unthinkable that he would leave. They're devastated. They're destroyed. They're rattled by these words. And then he says this, as he's praying, Father, I've said all that I've said in the world, that their joy might be fulfilled. Have you know how it is when you're in an emotion, like you're really wrenched. It's difficult to see yourself in any other emotion. You're so caught up in that emotion. It's like, how do I get out of this? You want out of it, but you just don't see the way out. That's where they're at. But Jesus knows that this discouragement that they're in is just for a moment. It's just temporary, because he knows what's coming. He's going to go to the cross. He's going to do what needs to be done so that you and I can have heaven. And then he's going to rise again from the dead, and his resurrection is going to change everything. And so he's looking beyond this momentary distress that they're in, because he knows what's coming. Christian, please hear me. Whatever you go through, however difficult it is, you need to know this. That is not your destiny. Glory is your destiny. Psalm 30 says, weeping may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And mourning is what we are all destined for. We may weep tonight, but tomorrow is a new day that starts a new life, and we have joy forevermore. And we find that in the promise of Christ. And then he says in verse 14, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Friends, there are really only two groups that comprise the human race, the lost and the saved. All other distinctions pale in comparison to those two things. Those that are born again and those that have been born once. Unbelievers and believers, the followers of Jesus and those who are not following, those who are destined for heaven and those that are destined for hell. It's the only real distinction that carves up the human race. All the divisions that man thinks of would just fade away in comparison to the difference between being born again and born once. The world's hostility rises to its fiercest form in its opposition to the gospel and those that believe it, because the world does not want to be told that it's wrong. The world wants what it wants when it wants it. It is self-willed. It is self-centered. It abhors the idea that it was created by God and for him. It wants to exist for itself. And so it wants to silence anyone that says it's wrong or shows it's wrong by living a life in harmony with God. You and I were at one time a part of that world that hates God and his people. We were a part of that world. But the gospel, his word, it carved us out and has ushered us into a new realm, into his kingdom. And in that realm, all distinctions that would separate us have been overcome by God's love. So the world hates us because our very existence is a constant reminder that it's wrong. All across our country, colleges and universities have set aside what they call safe zones, safe spaces. These are places where students can go and not have to hear anything that would challenge their opinions. It's called a university, which comes from the word universe. Because in this institution of higher learning, you're supposed to encounter ideas different than yours, so that maybe you can expand and grow. Maybe there are ideas that you need to hear because they challenge your misconceptions. Or maybe your ideas are right and you need to be challenged by others' ideas so you can hone your own ideas. But the idea is at a university, you should be encountering other ideas. But no, we're going to have safe zones now because they're such snowflakes, they can't defend their own ideas. And don't stress me out. The world, the whole world, is a safe space that does not want to hear the gospel. Because the gospel is an idea it does not want to believe. Jesus says it as it is. The world hates him, and as his disciples, as those that are following him, it's going to hate us. So what's the best option then? If the world hates us, let's leave. Let's depart. Let's get out of this place that hates us. Well, verse 15, Jesus says, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. The solution isn't removal. It's protection from the devil, who was the architect and the agitator of all that hate. You see, friends, listen. We used to be part of that world, and that world hates God and his people. We used to be haters. But you and I were delivered by what? By the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the message of his love. We've been ushered out of a realm of hatred into a realm of love. We used to be haters, but now we're the hate head. But we must never go back to being the haters. Hate is going to hate. But you're not a hater anymore. You're not a hater anymore. Hear me, you're not a hater anymore. You've been born again. You're a lover of God. And to be a lover of God means to be a lover of those that bear his image. Who? All of them. All of them. We can't go back to hate. We've been saved by love and for love. Verse 17. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. That word sanctify, it's such a religious sounding word. It simply means to set something apart as special. You have, I'll bet you have, sanctified clothes. And you might think, well, I don't have a priest's garment in my closet. No, you have sanctified clothes. They're the ones that hang in your closet. Do you have any clothes in your closet that are covered in plastic? Those are your sanctified clothes. Those are clothes you wear only for special occasions. You know, if it's a guy, it's a suit probably. If it's a lady, it's probably a formal dress. It's got plastic over it, maybe zippered up so the moths can't get to it. Those are sanctified clothes, baby. That's the idea, set apart for something special. Notice what Jesus said here. Lord, set them apart as special by your truth. Your word is truth. Because Jesus says all of this in short phrases, it's difficult sometimes to connect things. Verse 17 goes with what he's just said in 15. You see, we're not to depart the world that hates us. We're not to move to a retreat somewhere or a monastery or some kind of special enclave. We're not to carve ourselves out from society, leaving the cities, and going and living in some convent or some monastery. That's not God's plan. We're to stay in this world that hates us. We're to stay faithful to the mission that he's given us. And that's to live and to share the gospel. Because it's that gospel that delivers us from a life of hate into a life of joyous love. A love for God and then a love for others. So we're in the world, but we're not of it. We're to be an island of love in a sea of hate, a city of light in a valley of darkness. Verse 18. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. And friends, there it is. We are to carry on Jesus' mission. We are sent as he was. Now I want you to think about how Jesus was sent. Because he says, as you sent me, I send them. We are sent like Jesus was sent. So let's think for a minute how he was sent. How was Jesus sent? What motivated God to send his son? Well, it's John 3:16. Why don't you all say it with me? For God so hated the world that he... Oh, no, that's right. Sorry. For God so loved that he gave his only begotten son. So we're to go in what? What are we to go to the world in? Hatred or love? We're to go in love. Isn't it interesting how we respond to people that we know really care about us? When someone comes to us and they just want to sell us something, or they want to pitch us, or they just want to, confront us with their opinion, we tend to be so defensive, or don't bother me, leave me alone. But when someone comes to us and we know they're coming to us because they really care about us, how open we are. We need to go as he came, in love, motivated by love, moved by love. The problems of our world are solved by love, not hate. Jesus came humbly. Think about how he came. He came humbly. Here he is, the one deserving of all praise and honor and exaltation. And when he comes, what does he do? He goes to the very end of human society, the very base of it. He becomes an infant, this thing that is most vulnerable. And then as he grows up and matures, he takes the form of a servant, and he kneels at the feet of his own disciples, and he washes their feet. He came humbly. That's the way we're to go. Not haughty, not with an attitude of, I'm a Christian, I've got it all together, I know what the problem is, I know the solution, you need to listen to me, just shut up and listen to me. Look, I've got a bumper sticker. How do you respond when somebody comes to you arrogantly? You're not open. But when someone comes to us in humility, says, I just want your life to be better, how open we are. Jesus came for all. He didn't come just for the nice people, for the pretty people, for the smart people. He came for everybody. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Jesus came for everybody. Now we can't come to this hateful world with an attitude of, well, I want these people in heaven with me, but not these people. No, it's everybody. And he came without compromising the truth. When he came, Jesus would not compromise the truth. Yeah, he came in love, and he came humbly, and he came for everybody. The lepers, the blind, the women that were overlooked and downtrodden. Mary Magdalene, this woman that the world had chewed up and spit out, and he privileged her to be the first one to hear of his resurrection. But he also came refusing to compromise the truth. Why? Because it is only a pure and undiluted gospel that can solve the problems of the human race. We can't edit the gospel. We can't change it. A changed gospel has no power to save. It's not our job to make the gospel look good. The gospel already looks good. We just need to put it out there and live it, and it's the thing that wins the lost. There's a movement in the evangelical church today, largely from the younger generation, that wants to edit the gospel to make it more appealing to the culture. And so there are certain parts of the message that they want to edit because they feel like, the world doesn't want to hear it. Well, the world doesn't want to hear the gospel. Get over it. It doesn't want to hear it, but it needs to hear it. And the point is, that's what saves the world. But when we start negotiating things like what it means to be human, what it means to be a man, or to be a woman, or to be married, or to engage in certain behaviors, well, it's legal now. Yeah, but that doesn't make it right. We can't compromise the gospel. Because when we edit it, it's no longer the gospel. I want to... Can I riff? Is that okay? This is a little bit of a sidelight, but it feeds right into what we're looking at here, and I believe it is so applicable to what Jesus is praying. So, the early Christians were an amazing community of love. They were overwhelmed. They understood the gospel was a message of God's love for all people. So they were transformed by that love. It progressively transformed them so that they were more and more like Jesus. Other people saw that, the love that the Christians were enjoying and was being extended to them, and many of them came in. They were won by love. So much so that the Christians began to look at each other and they said, you know what, the things that used to carve us up in different categories and classes and segments of society here in Roman civilization, those things don't work here among us. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. That trumps everything else. So when they would have their church services, you had slaves and free people sitting side by side. In fact, some of the churches, the pastor was a slave, and in the congregation was his master. And here's a master that owns the slave, but when he goes and he's sitting in church, that's his pastor. And they leave, and guess what? They go back home, and now it's master and servant again. But do you think maybe their relationship was transformed? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So much so that was part of the slam that the world used on Christians. These Christians are ruining everything. Look how they're turning the world upside down, was said of the church. Of course, the church was just turning the world right side up. It was already upside down. Relationships were being transformed. And this is what won so many people to faith in Christ, even though being a Christian was dangerous. It was a time of persecution. They were being martyred, killed. It didn't matter. Better to live 2 days as a Christian than the rest of my life as a pagan. And then what happened was the church and state married up with each other. They buddied up, and it became popular to be a Christian. And you had a lot of people that ended up joining the church because it was the politically expedient thing to do. And now you got the church marrying the world, and you move away from Christianity into Christendom. And then you have different nations and groups that split up, and they use religion as an excuse to go to war with each other. And now we have wars of religion, and you have thousands of people dying. Then the Renaissance happens, and people start to break away from the idea of we need to relate to life from the perspective of belief in God. I mean, look at how messed up the church is. They're killing each other. And so you have people that say, we don't need religion anymore, that's superstition. We have reason. We have our brains. Let's just use our brains. And so they began to divorce themselves from the idea that reality is to be understood as a relationship with God. We can just use reason. And they developed the scientific method. By the way, most of that was Christian scientists that figured out science. But you have others that take that and they go run with it, and they say, listen, we all have brains, and we all have logic, and we all have reason, and so what we need to do is instead of appealing to God, let's just use human reason, and once we do, we'll all agree, because we all have brains and we all have reason, and so we'll just reason ourselves into a place of unity. But the problem is this. Because they rejected God and pushed him out of the public square, they tried to look at what it means to be human without reference to God. And that doesn't work. Why? Because human beings are created in the image of God for God. And when you remove God from the equation, then what you do is you come up with all kinds of goofy ideas of what it means to be human. Now you guys tell me, as God has now been effectively removed from the public square, and the philosophy that dominates society is called secular humanism, are we all just happy campers all together? Are we all unified? Is society one? We're more fragmented and more divided than we've ever been. In fact, we have a new term for it. It's called identity politics, where people carve themselves up into different groups. This is what it means to be human. No, this is what it means to be human. No, this is what it means to be human. And who I am is more important than who you are. And there's only so much of the pie, and I want the biggest slice. And now we've all gone to war with each other. And our society is fragmented into all these groups today that are at war. The hate rolls on. the solution to the problems of our world today is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We cannot be human, truly human, until we first understand who God is. Because we were created in His image for Him. The gospel brings us back into relationship with God so that we can become who God created us to be. So Jesus says to the Father, as you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. Where were you sent? Where is your mission? It's to your family. It's to your friends. That's your world. It's your neighbors. It's the people that you work with, the people that you live with. That's your world. That's where God has called you. That's where He sent you. Jesus said, as you sent me, Father, I send them. Jesus sends you to them. Me? I'm sent here. Right here. This is where God has sent me personally, to be the shepherd of Calvary Chapel of Oxnard. This is who and what I am. This defines me. I believe God created me for this. And I need you to know, I will stay here doing this until Jesus calls me home. This is my priority. This is my preoccupation. This is what God has called me to do. The vision that He implanted in me 36 years ago, God has given great fruit to, but as with any vision, the further you go into it, the clearer it becomes. And God has made clear that He wants more people in this city to come to know Him. Amen. And to be part of this family. That's why we're expanding our footprint, why we bought the building next door, and why we signed the contract this week with the general contractor to start work on that building. So that's my vision. That's where He sent me, and you need to know I'm committed to that, right? But God is also speaking to me specifically about this as it relates to me personally, that God is giving me vision for ministry and work outside these walls. I need to be, for you, an example of what it means to follow Jesus. Amen? I mean, that goes with the part of being a shepherd, being a pastor. Follow me. Paul says that. Follow me as I follow Christ. And I believe that is true of any pastor. He should be an example to his flock. And you need to know that God has been dealing with me for a while now about the need to use my gifts of leadership and management by bringing blessing to the community outside these walls. We live in a dreamland, folks. On the coast of California, we live in one of the premier places on planet Earth. Sadly, the stewardship of our home, our community, has not kept pace with its environment. And I believe that God is calling me to bring the gifts that He's given me of leadership and management to the city. And so I'm running for the District 2 seat of the City Council in November. It's just what He's calling me to do. But you need to know that's never going to impinge on what He's called me to do here. I'm a pastor. If the Lord, I don't know if the Lord would be blessing me or cursing me with election. I'm not really sure. If the Lord sees fit to put me into office, I really see it as simply a way to bring more blessing to this community, to show them His love, that He desires that all people would flourish, and that it would make me more effective in being able to minister here. Look at verse 19 as we end. Jesus says, "And for their sakes," the disciples, for us, "I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified by the truth. Jesus wasn't half-hearted or lackadaisical toward his mission because the stakes were so great. It was our eternal salvation. Jesus was all in. And that's simply where I want to end today. Jesus said, Father, as you sent me, I send them. And then Jesus says, and I'm all in on this. I'm setting myself apart to this task. And then he says, may they also be sanctified. I want to encourage you, Christian, please hear me. I want to encourage you today. Be all in on the gospel. Amen. Be all in on it. Amen. Don't come short. In your own life, don't come short in anything that God intends for you. God has so much more for all of us, for you. Don't come short. Enter into all of it. Be all in. And then realize as God brings you into that flourishing, as you surrender to that and you yield to that and you intentionally go after it, as your life is transformed, you become a channel through which that transformation flows to others. You're sent. Who are you sent to? For me right now, I'm being sent into civil government. Where are you sent? Where are you sent? Go. Go. Because our God is great.